Ever wondered how people survived icy nights without a thermostat, fuzzy socks, or even basic insulation? Welcome to ancient Greece, where peasants weren't sitting around waiting to freeze. Nope, they got seriously creative. From body heat hacks to literal poop walls. Yep, really. Their winter survival game was stronger than you'd expect. Ancient Greek peasants had no electricity, no blankets from IKEA, and no emergency space heaters to plug in when things got cold. But they still managed to survive winters that would make most of us cry into our oat milk lattes. They went beyond survival and got smart. One of their most effective tricks was digging their homes right into the earth. 2 to 3 feet down, these sunken homes were naturally insulated by the ground. Archaeologists have confirmed these houses stayed about 10 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than homes built at surface level. That's not just a fun fact. If you've ever noticed how your basement stays warm in winter, even without much effort, everything inside was designed to trap heat. Ceilings were low, walls were thick, and windows were barely there. No drafts, no wasted warmth. It was like living inside a carefully sealed thermos, but made of dirt. The energy-saving instincts were so sharp, they'd make a modern eco-designer take notes. The construction itself was equal parts resourceful and stomach-turning. They built walls using something called wattle and daub. Twigs formed a loose framework, and over that came a sticky blend of clay, straw, and animal manure. That's right, literal poop walls. Not exactly Pinterest-worthy, but they worked. Studies show this method has insulation power close to what we get from fiberglass today. In other words, while people now stress over wall colors and textured paint, peasants were layering cow dung for survival and somehow pulling it off. In the center of it all was the hearth. This open fire wasn't just for boiling lentils, it was the lifeline of the household. It kept the home livable with temperatures around 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, even during brutal cold. Smoke drifted slowly out through the roof or small holes near the top of the walls. Over time, soot built up and created a kind of smoky barrier that helped retain warmth and shield the structure from moisture. Not great for breathing, but impressive for keeping the roof from caving in. Everything in the home, sleeping mats, stools, food supplies, was positioned around the fire like it was the sun itself. And in a way, it was. That flickering heat was the center of their little universe, the only thing standing between them and a frostbite. The placement of houses wasn't random either. Builders angled them toward the sun, letting natural light warm the walls during the day. In winter, families patched holes, added straw, hung thick fabric across doorways, and pressed extra thatch into the roof. They basically winterized their homes with whatever they could find, and it worked. By the 1300s, their housing game had leveled up. Walls got sturdier, roofs got heavier, and some homes even had basic smoke control systems. There was no formal training, no engineering school, just generations of trial, error, and stubborn determination. But if you think literal dung walls are wild, wait until you hear about their sleep strategy. These people basically turned bedtime into a military operation that would make Navy SEALs jealous peasants didn't have the luxury of sleeping in, wasting daylight, or lounging near the hearth all day. Every hour mattered, every movement was timed, and somehow they managed to turn freezing chaos into a functioning winter routine that would make a modern planner jealous. The smartest strategy was sticking to the sun. Between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., when the sun was at its peak, the real work got done. These were the golden hours. The warmth wasn't much, but when temperatures barely rose above freezing, even a few degrees made a difference. Everyone adjusted their lives to this window, from hauling water to repairing roofs. It wasn't optional. In fact, some communities actually fined people who ignored winter work hours. Repeat offenders had to bring extra firewood to community stores. That's right, mess up your schedule, and you're paid with logs. To keep everyone alive, frost watchers were assigned at night. This wasn't voluntary. Villagers took turns monitoring shared fires to ensure they didn't go out. If the flames died before dawn, it meant cold homes, spoiled food, and possibly frostbite. The rotation was strict, and if someone skipped their turn, they owed the community again, usually in firewood or food. There was no sleeping through alarms here. You missed your shift, and the village remembered. Sleep wasn't one big block like today. People slept in two parts: first sleep and second sleep. After going to bed early, they'd naturally wake up around midnight for an hour or two, then go back to sleep until dawn. This wasn't weird. Doctors actually recommended it. That in between time was used for quiet chores, stoking fires, or even socializing. Some neighbors planned midnight visits. Yes, people scheduled hangouts for 1 a.m., and no one found that odd. Compare that to modern guilt over a 20-minute power nap. Back then, waking in the night was normal, expected, and built into the rhythm of survival. It made managing cold nights more bearable and gave them time to tend fires or check on animals without stumbling around half asleep. Meals weren't scattered across the day. The big one hit around 11 a.m., when the village bread ovens were hottest. Everyone used this shared heat source not just to bake, but to warm themselves. Ovens could raise indoor temperatures by up to 3 degrees Celsius. That's a huge deal when you're working in single digits. Timing was everything. When the bread bell rang, it meant the ovens were ready, and everyone rushed to make the most of it. Cold watchers, often elderly or injured villagers, monitored temperatures using clay pots filled with water or oil. If things started freezing indoors, they'd sound the alert and get others to boost the fires. These people were the original thermostats, reliable, unpaid, and covered in blankets. When the sun dipped, so did the temperature. But that's when the village met. Councils were held at twilight in the largest house, usually one with a strong central hearth. Dozens of bodies packed into one room could raise the temperature by 5 degrees Celsius. Body heat was a strategy. Important issues were discussed during the coldest nights because people were guaranteed to show up. No one wanted to miss a chance to warm up. Fire checking duties rotated weekly, and skipping your turn meant public shame or extra chores. Sharing beds with 6 people sounds intense, but here's what's about to absolutely blow your mind. They figured out how to keep food fresh for months without a single piece of modern technology. Ancient Greek peasants didn't have fridges, no ice boxes, no coolers, not even a chilly garage to stash leftovers. And yet, they kept food safe, fresh and edible through long winters without poisoning half the village. Their food preservation methods were surprisingly advanced. Some of them even rival what we use today. These people weren't just tossing vegetables into holes. Their underground storage systems were planned like mini cold storage facilities. Families dug multi-chambered pits with separate areas for grains, root vegetables, dried meat, and even dairy. Each section was organized by temperature needs and humidity levels. Archaeological digs show that these pits held steady at around 40 degrees Fahrenheit all year long. That's the same range your fridge uses today to keep food from going bad. One of the best examples comes from medieval Yorkshire, where 200 storage pits were found, serving just 50 families. That's about 4 cold storage chambers per household. They didn't just build one big pit and hope for the best. They tailored these structures to the food they had. Compared to some root cellars today, they were actually more effective, thanks to their depth and layout. Instead of digital readouts, peasants used vegetables to track temperature. Certain root veggies were incredibly sensitive to environmental changes. Carrots, turnips, and radishes would show signs of frost damage before anything else. If a few went soft or started splitting, that was the sign it was time to add more insulation. If things started sprouting too early, they knew the pit was getting too warm or humid. Airflow had to be adjusted fast to avoid losing the whole batch. Over 20 different vegetable types were ranked based on cold sensitivity, and people knew which ones to monitor. It was a low-tech, but highly effective way of keeping nature in check. Hay served more than one purpose. It fed animals and insulated homes. Stacking hay in layers around storage jars created a slow-release insulation system. Each layer could stabilize the interior temperature by about 2 degrees Celsius. That's not a small boost when you're trying to keep cabbage from freezing. In colder areas or during extreme winters, they packed food with snow, not just thrown on top, strategically placed between layers, compacted, and covered. Even after the snow melted, the internal temperature hovered around 35 to 38 degrees Fahrenheit for weeks. Some families could keep food cold until late spring using this technique. Modern tests show these methods came surprisingly close to what synthetic insulation materials achieve today. These pits weren't just holes in the ground, they were engineered with precision. Many had built-in drainage systems to keep moisture from pooling. Some setups even had narrow airflow channels for ventilation, preventing rot. Clay pots were used to balance humidity, often hitting that sweet spot of 85 to 95% needed to store fruits and seeds long term. The results were impressive. In some cases, archaeologists have recovered 700-year-old seeds from these pits that were still viable. That kind of long-term preservation doesn't happen by accident. Food rotation systems were also in place. Older produce was kept closer to the top for easy access, while fresher food was stored deeper. You're not ready for what's coming next. These people were consuming more calories than Olympic athletes, and they weren't even trying to get jacked. Cold weather meant one thing for ancient Greek peasants: eat more or freeze. And not just a little more, winter diets pack in around 4,000 to 5,000 calories a day. That's more than what a professional swimmer might eat while training. And they weren't doing it for gains or aesthetics. They were just trying to stay alive. There were no modern snacks, no grocery runs. Every calorie had to come from food they'd prepared ahead of time: dried beans, smoked meat, root vegetables buried deep in the ground. Still, they figured out how to make meals that were dense, efficient, and surprisingly smart. These folks didn't count calories, they just understood what worked. Pottage was the winter go-to. Think of one big pot sitting over a fire, bubbling day and night, for weeks. They never started from scratch, just kept tossing in more ingredients as they went. One day it might be turnips and barley, the next some peas, lentils, or bits of dried meat. Because it simmered nonstop, the heat killed off anything dangerous. No refrigeration needed. It was warm, filling, and endlessly flexible. Even better, it had a decent nutritional balance: carbs from grains, protein from legumes, and vitamins from whatever roots they dug up. It wasn't pretty, but it got the job done, bowl after bowl. If it could be fermented, it probably was. Cabbage, grains, fruit, nothing went to waste. They turned it all into tangy, funky, long-lasting staples. Even the beer they drank pulled double duty. A pint in winter had around 400 calories, enough to be considered actual fuel. And no, it wasn't a trendy craft IPA. It was thick, filling, and made to keep you going. Funny enough, their fermented foods often had way more probiotic diversity than most things on store shelves today. Gut health wasn't a concept they talked about, but they were doing it better than most modern people without realizing it. Bread, but built different bread, was dense, dark, and loaded with fiber. None of that soft, fluffy stuff we're used to now. Just a couple of thick slices gave them more fiber than some people today get in 3 whole days. And they didn't just bake for taste. Overcooking certain foods actually makes more calories available. By cooking the heck out of grains and roots, they could squeeze up to 30% more energy from the same ingredients. They also ate more in winter, up to 60% more than in the warmer months. Bodies needed fuel to stay warm, and meals were timed for that. A hearty one in the morning, something solid around midday, and a warm bite before bed to keep the heat going overnight. Think that's extreme? Their clothing game is about to make you question everything. They created a layering system so advanced it puts most modern winter gear to absolute shame. Cold nights demanded teamwork. In ancient Greek villages, staying warm meant sleeping together, literally. Beds were shared, often with 6 people packed onto one platform, not for comfort, but for heat. Combined body warmth could raise the temperature by around 8 degrees Celsius, a boost that made sleep possible when indoor temperatures dropped near freezing. Body placement mattered. Sleeping in groups helped reduce the amount of skin exposed to cold air. With people lined up side by side, heat stayed in and the chill stayed out. This strategy cut surface area exposure by about 30%, keeping warmth where it was needed most. Some communities tracked this closely. If a household had extra sleeping space and didn't use it efficiently, local officials could intervene. Everyone had to contribute to the shared effort. Beds weren't personal spaces. They were part of a larger system that kept the entire household functioning during winter. Sleeping platforms followed a specific design. Layers started with straw at the bottom to trap air and moisture. Then came wool or animal skins, topped off with coarse fabrics or repurposed cloth. Each material added another barrier between the sleeper and the cold. Height also played a role. Beds stood about 18 inches above the ground, high enough to avoid the coldest air near the floor, but low enough to benefit from warmer air circulating above. The platforms tilted slightly, a 15-degree slope from head to foot. This setup helped keep airflow moving across the surface and added comfort for sleeping. The slight dip in the middle created a shallow bowl effect, helping sleepers stay close without rolling apart. Heat is collected naturally at the center, right where the most vulnerable people usually lie. Sleeping positions followed quiet rules. Children, elders, and anyone sick stayed in the warm center. Stronger adults took the outside spots and adjusted their positions during the night based on duties. Some rotated to tend fires, others shifted to get up early. The routine ran smoothly because everyone understood the rhythm. Even body alignment came into play. People pressed close, facing the same direction to block cold drafts. This created a sealed shape that locked in warmth. The familiar curled sleeping position, what's now called spooning, emerged from this need for shared insulation. It offered up to 2 degrees Celsius more warmth in the core area compared to loose, scattered sleeping. These arrangements weren't accidental. Every detail had a purpose, from the number of people on a bed to how far it stood off the ground. Through shared heat, careful structure, and coordinated movement, sleep turned into one of the most important tools for surviving winter. No gadgets, no fluff, just people using what they had, with precision that still impresses today. When winter hit hard, ancient Greek peasants didn't rely on fashion. They relied on function. Their clothes weren't pretty, but they worked. Every layer, material, and stitch served a purpose. It wasn't luck or guessing. It was centuries of experience passed down like survival code. Wool cloaks were never scrubbed, squeaky clean. People knew that lanolin, the natural oil in wool, was key to staying dry. Once washed out, the warmth disappeared with it. Cloaks that still had that greasy feel held up better in wet and cold weather. The saying went, "A clean wool cloak is a cold wool cloak." That oily wool repelled water and trapped heat in a way that rivals modern water-resistant fleece. No lab needed, just a sharp eye and generations of trial and error. Kept dry and warm without needing layers of high-tech coatings. Instead of one thick coat, people stacked 5 separate layers. Thin linen next to the skin, thicker wool on the outside. Each layer trapped air, and that trapped air worked like insulation. More layers meant more heat held close to the body. Some setups held warmth for 6 straight hours, even in freezing temperatures. That's the kind of thermal retention you'd expect from modern winter parkas. And the weaving mattered too. Each layer had a different fiber direction, smooth inside, tighter, and rougher outside. The design worked better than most cheap winter wear sold today. Villagers used moss as natural insulation, stuffed into boots, packed into gloves, even sewn into tunics. Over a dozen varieties were known and selected for how dry, springy, or soft they stayed. Some mosses even had antibacterial properties, cutting down on skin infections during damp months. This wasn't random plant stuffing, it was organized, almost scientific. Entire communities had moss experts. Some villages even clashed over the best gathering spots. The right moss worked nearly as well as synthetic fillers in modern jackets, but grew in nearby forests. Outer garments got a coating of animal fat, mostly sheep or deer. It worked like wax, sealing fabric from rain and snow. Mixed with pine sap, it thickened into a paste that could hold up in storms for hours. A 13th century recipe combined these with such precision that modern tests found it nearly as effective as basic waterproof sprays. This gear wasn't stylish, but it was efficient. Every cloak, sock, and tunic was built with a purpose: to survive. Without brands, machines, or labels, peasants created a clothing system that held up to cold, wind, and rain one layer at a time. They faced the cold and outsmarted it. Every layer, every trick, every shared bed was a battle move against winter. If this blew your mind, don't scroll past. Like, share, and subscribe for more raw, untold history that hits hard.